7 years of abundance and 7 years of crisis. The meaning of Pharaoh's dream had to do with what God would do on earth according to his sovereign will. The biblical passage in which Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream reveals God's power in the government of history and proves how divine purpose is often fulfilled in the most unlikely way. And in this video, we will talk exactly about this. We will understand how by the power of God, Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream. The Bible records the episode in which Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream there in the book of Genesis in the Old Testament. According to the biblical text of Genesis chapter 41, one night Pharaoh dreamed twice, and those dreams disturbed the monarch of Egypt. In the morning, Pharaoh summoned all the wizards and wise of Egypt so that they could interpret their dreams. At that time, kings had some sages, wizards at their disposal to advise them on decisive issues, including important of the role of these people was to interpret dreams. But in Pharaoh's case, none of his sages was able to reveal the meaning of his dreams. This, of course, must have made Pharaoh even more disturbed. This is because in ancient times, the people of the Old East believed that dreams could serve as omens of the future and bring messages from the gods. Moreover, in cultures such as Egyptian, for example, monarchs were identified as deities, or at least representatives of the gods. So when a king had a dream, usually the message of this dream was always received with great importance. Following, the Bible says Pharaoh dreamed, and in his dream he was standing by the river. This river, of course, was the Nile River that bathed the Egyptian lands. The Nile River was even the symbol of Egypt's fertility. He was the source of life for those people who depended mainly on agriculture to survive. So, in Pharaoh's dream, 7 cows, fat and showy, rose from the river and began to graze among the reeds. Then from the same river, 7 more cows came. This time they were thin and ugly. These cows went to the other cows by the Nile River, and something very strange happened. The lean cows ate the 7 fat cows. And even after having eaten them, lean cows remained thin and ugly. And with that, Pharaoh woke up immediately. The biblical text also reports that the same night, Pharaoh went back to sleep and had another dream. This time he saw 7 hawns of great and good wheat that grew in the same foot. But then, 7 other ears of wheat that were withered and burned by the eastern wind. So again, something unlikely happened. The 7 grand ears were swallowed by the 7 merated ears. Later, when Pharaoh's sages could not interpret their dreams, the head of the courtride told Pharaoh that he had known in prison a young Hebrew that interpreted dreams. So, quickly, to introduce himself to Pharaoh, Jose had to shave and change clothes. Although for most people of the Old East nearby, including the Hebrews, the beard was valued as a sign of honor, the Egyptians had a different custom regarding hair. For this reason, Egyptian men were always completely shaved. Already before Pharaoh, Joseph heard the dream that the king of Egypt had had, and also knew that no one had been able to interpret him. Pharaoh also stated that he had come to his knowledge that Joseph had the ability to interpret dreams. But at this point, Joseph took the focus of himself and pointed to divine sovereignty. Joseph stated that giving the interpretation of a dream was not something that depended on him, but on the Lord. If anyone could give Pharaoh the true interpretation of his dream, that one was God. Thus, the interpretation of Pharaoh's dream was never a display of Joseph's skills, but a manifestation of the power of God. Then, after clarifying these things, Joseph told Pharaoh that he had actually had a single dream. In this dream, Pharaoh had been revealed what God would do. Thus, in the interpretation of Pharaoh's dream, Joseph revealed that the 7 fat cows and the 7 great ears meant 7 years, just as the 7 lean cows and the 7 withers also meant another 7 years. The difference was that the 7 fat cows and the 7 grand ears represented 7 years of much abundance that were coming over Egypt. On the other hand, the 7 lean cows and the 7 merated ears represented 7 years of great hunger that would make the 7 years of abundance forgotten. Joseph also explained that the fact that Pharaoh dreamed twice meant that God had already decided that question and rushed to accomplish it. In other words, this was an indication that nothing could prevent God's decree from being executed. But then, Through God's wisdom, Joseph also informed Pharaoh what should be done so that Egypt could cross that period of hunger. Pharaoh was then amazed at the plan reported by Joseph and acknowledged that there would be no more wise and careful than Joseph himself to guide Egypt during that time. At this point, the biblical text makes it clear that Pharaoh realized that in Joseph was the divine spirit. He understood that God himself had been revealed to Joseph all those things. This meant that Pharaoh had recognized that Joseph acted under the power of God, and that's how Joseph was placed as governor of all Egypt. It is true that we do not know the degree of understanding that the Pharaoh pagan had about the person of the only true God who acted through Joseph. But undoubtedly all that situation meant a great defeat to the Egyptian gods represented by Pharaoh wise. In fact, in all this, God was making evil and good and fulfilling his sovereign purpose of saving the family from the covenant. His purpose of preserving Abraham's descent to the praise of the glory of his name. And if you liked this video, share it with someone else. And also leave your comment by talking about what you can learn in the biblical text that records how Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream.